What is martial law? LetMeIdle. Martial law is a legal system that gives the military control over civilian law in times of emergency. This can be in response to natural disasters, civil unrest, or other situations where the civilian government is unable to maintain order. In martial law, the military has the power to arrest and detain civilians, as well as censor the media and restrict movement. In some cases, martial law can also be used to suspend habeas corpus, which is the right to a fair trial. While martial law is often seen as a last resort, it can also be controversial and lead to human rights abuses. In this blog post, we will explore the history of martial law and some of its most famous, and infamous, implementations. What is martial law? In short, martial law is the imposition of military rule by the government. This can happen in times of emergency, such as war or civil unrest, when the civilian authorities are unable to maintain order. Martial law may also be declared in response to natural disasters or other catastrophic events. Under martial law, the military takes over the running of the government and society. The president or other head of state suspends normal constitutional protections, giving the military free rein to restore order. Civil rights and civil liberties are often revoked during martial law, and curfews, censorship, and other restrictive measures may be imposed. Martial law is a controversial measure, and its use is often criticized by human rights groups. Critics argue that it is a tool that can be abused by dictators to stay in power, and that it violates the basic principles of democracy. History of martial law. The term martial law is often used interchangeably with military law, but they are not one and the same. Martial law is the imposition of the highest level of military authority over a civilian population. It is usually invoked in times of war, insurrection, or natural disaster, although it has also been used in times of civil unrest. Military law, on the other hand, is the body of laws and regulations that govern members of the armed forces. This includes both federal and state laws, as well as regulations promulgated by individual branches of the military. Martial law has a long history, dating back to ancient Rome. In its early years, it was often used as a tool of dictators and tyrants to quash dissent and consolidate power. The Roman Emperor Julius Caesar is perhaps the most famous example from this era. He declared martial law during his reign in order to crush opposition and solidify his grip on power. Over time, martial law has evolved into a more nuanced tool that can be used for both good and bad ends. It is now typically seen as a last resort to be employed when all other options have failed. In recent years, martial law has been imposed in response to everything from terrorist attacks, 9/11, to political protests, Occupy Wall Street. While it remains a controversial practice, martial law can be an effective way to restore order during periods of chaos. It is important to remember, however, that it must be used sparingly and with great care, as it can easily lead to the abuse of power. Pros and cons of martial law. There are a number of pros and cons to martial law. On the plus side, martial law can help to restore order during periods of unrest or conflict. It can also be used as a tool to protect citizens from harm. On the downside, however, martial law can lead to human rights abuses and a loss of civil liberties. It can also be used as a pretext for government repression. How does martial law affect the economy? Martial law is usually imposed during times of emergency, such as war or civil unrest. When martial law is in effect, the military takes over the administration of justice and civil affairs. This can have a major impact on the economy, as businesses may be forced to close and people may be unable to go about their normal lives. Martial law can also lead to inflation and a decrease in the standard of living. What are the different types of martial law? There are 4 different types of martial law. 1. Absolute martial law. This is when the military completely takes over the government and the country is run like a military dictatorship. 2. Partial martial law. This is when the military takes over some aspects of the government, but not all of it. 3. Suspended martial law. This is when the military takes over the government for a short period of time, usually in response to a crisis. After the crisis has passed, martial law is lifted and the government goes back to normal. 4. State of emergency. This is when the government declares a state of emergency in response to a crisis, but does not hand over control to the military. What is the difference between martial law and a state of emergency? Martial law is a system of government in which the military forces take over the administration of the state. A state of emergency, on the other hand, is a situation in which the government suspends some of the normal operations of the state in order to deal with a crisis. The main difference between martial law and a state of emergency is that martial law is imposed by the military, while a state of emergency is declared by the civilian authorities. Martial law suspends all civil rights and gives the military complete control over the population. A state of emergency does not necessarily suspend civil rights, but it may give the government increased powers to deal with the crisis. Conclusion. Martial law is a legal concept that has been around for centuries. It generally refers to the imposition of military rule in times of emergency, when the civilian government is unable to function. In some cases, martial law may also be imposed during wartime. While martial law is often controversial, it can sometimes be necessary in order to restore order and keep people safe. Originally published at LetMeIdle.com on October 20, 2022.